This podcast is brought to you by Carvana. Got a car to sell but no time to waste? Hop on to Carvana.com to get a real offer for your car in seconds. All you have to do is enter your license plate, answer a few quick questions, and if you accept the offer, Carvana will pay you as soon as you hand the keys over. They even offer same-day pickup in many cities. Save your time, score some cash, and sell your car the convenient way to
Carvana.
Pickup times vary. Fees may apply.
Centuries ago, a war was fought and Rigoria was destroyed. But in a last-ditch effort, there was one elf who buried a little bit of magic.
Guarantee anyone will find it.
Let's hope someone does.
And now, one young man
Pops, what is this?
will have to end a war started long before his time.
Can't run!
Can't! This spell has taken hold. This is the last possible chance this world may have.
Echoes of Rigoria, now available wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Gas mark 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm gonna cook a meal that's gonna make you mine. I'm turning up the oven, now we're ready to roast. When you touch me, honey, you'll love me the most. Come on and put me in your loving shoe.
Welcome to another Britflix.com podcast even. My name's Stuart Wright, and today's guest is Matt Harlock. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Stuart. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm very well. Now, we are going to talk about your feature film, Blockhead, which is world premiering at Frightfest. And as it's Frightfest, I'm going to tweak my normal format of 3 films that have impacted everything in your adult life and make it very subtly, and not too subtly, I suppose, 3 horror films that have impacted everything in your adult life. Does that sound like what you've signed up for?
It does, yes. I had to do some thinking about which films to discuss, and I had a long list, and then I had a short list, and then we have a selection. So yeah, let's jump in.
Indeed. Right then. Well, let's start with Blockhead first, which is going to be world premiering, as I said, at Frightfest. You wrote and directed this movie, so that makes this first question easy. What was the kernel of the idea that you had that led us to this film that people are going to see at Frightfest?
Well, the kernel of the idea was the kind of the Salieri kind of complex that you get to see discussed in Amadeus. Really, it was something that I was really obsessed by. This idea of being mediocre and knowing it, and having the horrible thing that Salieri has happened to him, which is that he happens to live next door to the greatest composer that's ever lived, and so that's going to make anyone feel bad about themselves. But the idea of that pain, the horrific kind of lack of that is just washing through him, and it comes out in this kind of like awful jealousy, which turns into this rage. And I really became interested in that idea. And the reason I was interested in it, I think, is because anyone who writes or tries to be creative in any way, whether it's painting or whatever it might be, I think that everybody feels that lack in themselves. If only I was better, if only I could do this. And you compare yourself to other people, they seem to be doing it so easily. And so this seemed to me something that was ripe for my own examination, because and that I guess this is how I choose ideas. It really worried me that I couldn't stop thinking about it, and it also made me feel a bit sick. And so I was kind of a little bit obsessed with that idea, and I didn't want to make the film about a screenwriter because I felt it would be too on the nose. So I picked another kind of trope of writing in the creative sphere, which is the novel. And obviously that's not a new subject. There have been other films about novelists and about creative blocks, and that's the kind of thing that films about novelists tend to deal with, like they can't do what they want to. But the thing that I noticed, which was kind of where the stylistic intention came from, was that a lot of those films are comedies. So if you look at Adaptation or Barton Fink or Wonder Boys, they're all sort of quite light in terms of like, frustration, ha ha ha. And I must admit that I really felt much more like that it was when you can't write and you want to, it's horrific, it's really horrible. And so the idea for the film essentially was attempting to dig into my own kind of horrific anxieties myself about the writing process, and trying to externalize that feeling, and rather than have it be an internal process, because obviously writing is quite internal, it kind of happens in the brain as opposed to painting, for example. I wanted to externalize that process. So the goal of the film really was to take the paranoid kind of Salieri complex that we all kind of feel, and externalize that into a form which you can see on screen as opposed to just going on in the protagonist's mind. So yeah, it's kind of a hallucinatory sort of journey into the darkness of one's own mediocrity.
Wow, I don't want to go there. Matt. Not myself. I'd like to watch it. I don't want to go there.
You shouldn't want to. Nobody does. But yeah, I kind of felt it was something that I wanted to explore on film. So now we've got one. There you go.
So I mean, interestingly enough, like having Fate got sort of met that head on, how cathartic was it to dramatize this thing that sort of creeps up on the best of people? I mean, I remember seeing Scott Frank do his BAFTA lecture and him saying, "I'm scared of the blank page." I'm like going, "You're Scott Frank."
Yeah, like you hear Martin Scorsese saying, like, every time he gets on set, every morning he feels sick because he doesn't know where he's going to put the camera. And that's Martin Scorsese. You're like going, come on, like somebody, give us a break. Like it feels like that they're I think everyone feels like that everybody else knows how to do it. And so this is the reason for, people being very brave and discussing, their own, inability to get things done, because you need people to do that, because otherwise the process is not democratized. What you need to do is put everyone on a level playing field, and the people who are really good say, look, I'm still exploring this stuff too. Like, and that's really important, I think. So in one way, that's what this film I hoped would be in some small way, is basically what one person going, it's really hard and it's not something that you can do easily. And I also think that, creating something artistic that other people are required to consume or absorb or pay attention to, that should be hard. That shouldn't be easy. Like, I don't think there's any reason why, making something worthwhile should be a walk in the park. It shouldn't. You really should have to find a way to go into your guts and pull out something that means something, because you're asking for people's attention. You want to get 90 minutes of their undivided brain, and you're going to feed your thoughts and ideas into it. That's such a massive privilege. So I really think that the kind of the iniquities of people's own kind of self-doubt are something that we need to hear more of.
Now, not to get too abstract about it, when you were writing this, what were the storytelling challenges, and did the concept not bite you on the arse at any point when you were having the struggles, when you would have got to the storytelling challenges? Not the struggles, but the challenges.
Yeah. I mean, like, there were certain things that, particularly on this film, we found that there were things that we were looking at not only on the script, but obviously at the shoot and then in the edit. And I worked with a fantastic editor, Chris Blaine, who you might know. He directed Nina Forever with his brother Ben. Yep. And so working with him, we did quite a lot of what I would call rewriting in the edit to clarify certain ideas. So the challenges, I think, that probably popped up within the making of process from script to shoot, for example, would have been things like I was juggling who was going to say certain things. Like, for example, our main character, his name is Will Mercer. So he has a creative writing class that he teaches within the film. So you see him lecturing students. So he'll say certain things about writing then. He also has a mentor, like a kind of an older, kind of like, she's called Maggie. She used to be his teacher. She also says things about writing. And then he has this kind of magical tape cassette thing, which he finds in this apartment he's staying in, which also has these kind of like aphorisms about writing. One of the tricky things to me was to work out which of those three different voices was going to say the things that I wanted to say about writing. A good example would be that he's with his screenwriter, his writing mentor, and he says, "I can't write. This isn't working." She says, "Do you want to know why it's not working?" And basically, she tells him that unless you're willing to risk something of yourself, unless your soul is up for grabs, who cares what you write? And you're not putting yourself into this. So there were things that, you have to be quite careful with that kind of thing, because it can sound a bit like preachy. But I think it's coming from another character who's telling him off for not doing it. I think you can probably get away with that. So hopefully you can. So I think the tricky thing to me was that I had certain things that I wanted to say about writing, but particularly about inspiration, and that's what the film is really about. It's about where inspiration comes from, and what the price of that can be to the person who is receiving it. And so there's quite a few moments where famous writing inspirational moments, like Coleridge coming up with Kubla Khan or Robert Louis Stevenson coming up with Jekyll and Hyde, are kind of referenced to give people a sense of what the high watermark might be. And then you've got your poor lowly central character going, well, I'm not as good as them, what will I do? And so hopefully it's about him learning, but also some sense of like what the task is and what it should be.
I see that Stuart White is your DOP, cinematographer on this film. What was the conversation like between you and him in terms of look and feel for the film and what you wanted to achieve? And, what references were you using? Were you talking films? Were you talking, color palettes? Were you talking paintings? What was the conversation like to get the look and feel you wanted?
We were talking films. I don't know if you know, a lot of cinematographers use this website app called Shot Deck, which has basically got all of these stills from films, and you can type in things like, psychological thriller, and you can type in, descent into madness, and you can be very specific. So we did quite a lot of passing of references backwards and forwards with moments from the film that I was keen to identify. We talked a bit about Fincher, and we talked a bit about the idea of colour palette. And the thing that Stuart's brilliant at is not only is he very quick, which is really important when you're shooting a film on a lowish budget, but he was also really intuitive about the color choices, the things that I was trying to get at color wise. So, for example, a couple of the reviewers who we've been speaking to who watched the film said, that your color palette changes throughout the film. It goes from a kind of colder, kind of like green gray, sort of like murky blue, through to much warmer, to yellows, and then to oranges, and then to reds at the end. And I won't say why or what those mean, but that color palette change was something that we talked about a lot in terms of the reference to the lead character's emotional journey, because that's the only thing that you're really concerned about. Everything else is comes from the lead character's emotional journey. And if you know what that is, if you know where they start, where they're going, and where they end up and why, you can map all the other things, including their costume, their makeup, including shot choices, whether you're in their face or whether you're far away from them. All of those things come from their emotional journey. And so that's the thing that I talk about essentially, or all the time. It's what is that person going through, and what does it mean to them in terms of their goal, and whether they are on the front foot or the back foot, and how that relates to how we want the audience to feel about them. So Stuart was brilliant at that. He was really good at interpreting what I was trying to get at in terms of emotional journey represented visually.
Can you recall any occasion on the shoot that sticks in the memory of maybe a challenge that was overcome, like in the moment, or an achievement that you were a part of the shoot you were dreading and it went right? Yeah.
So there's a big moment of bloodletting later on in the film. I won't give specifics, but I will say that we were very nervous about all this blood because we had Dan Martin, who's an amazing special effects guru that I'm sure you know. He's worked with Ben Wheatley a lot, and we had his team on set. We had this kind of pressure pump. We had an actress who was all kind of rigged up with like shirts, and we were talking very nervously about how long it was going to take to re-rig it. But the thing that was amazing about that was that we found an office within a building that we were shooting in. We found a space that we could use as an office, which had these huge floor-to-ceiling corrugated plastic sliding screens. So we lit the whole scene through those backlit, and the whole thing kind of took on this very orangey kind of Blade Runner 2049 kind of glow, and became
lovely.
quite it was lovely. It really was. Like, we were looking at it, you could feel the change. It was on about day 4, maybe day 5, and you could feel the crew going, oh, this looks like it might be quite good. And we're like, oh, well, that's nice. And then we had this blood kind of pouring everywhere, and everyone thought it was like terribly exciting and fun. And we only did it a couple of times. We only had, I think, 3 sets of costumes, and the second one was perfect. The first one was kind of a trial run, but that was a real moment where we had to get everything working together. We had to get the actress, who was brilliant. I won't say who it is because that will spoil it, but her performance was brilliant, but the lighting and the scene was great. And then we had this special effect from Dan Martin's team and blood going everywhere, and we didn't know if it was going to work and where all this blood was going to go, and we had to clean the screens. And then on the second take, it all just went perfectly, and everyone like applauded afterwards, and it was like, oh wow, like it feels like we're really we've nailed something, we've got something there which we tried to do, and we weren't sure how it was going to go, and I think we might have got it. And I think we did. It was really exciting.
That's amazing. I mean, the way you tell the story, it's sort of like making a film is itself a sort of walk into the dark. And then you're saying within the film, there was these mini jaunts where you're going, we don't know how this is going to go either. We don't know how this is going to go. I mean, you're hoping, and you've got the right people, and that's part of the process, isn't it? About who you're collaborating with, and by you sort of mitigating the chances of getting the thing you want by the people you pull together to make the film.
Well, that was something that I think we really reflected on. So I produced it with Ollie Kendall, who's based in Bristol, and he's done like a lot of work and I've worked with him before. And we just had, we talked about it actually, like the idea seemed to be one that drew people to it. Like, I don't know how it is with other scripts, because I haven't really tried to cast and pull together a crew on another project. I'm setting up something now, but everybody really, as filmmakers, I think, responded to the idea of a film about a storyteller, because that's basically the commonality. Like, novelists and filmmakers we're all storytellers, and so I think they really enjoyed the idea of telling a story about that. So we got an amazing production designer, Jason Sinnott. We had obviously Stuart White, his gaffer Dan Svilanov. We had Nick O'Rourke doing the makeup, and we just had such a fantastic team. I really. It's in moments like that where you realise like how fortunate you've been to get people who really go, right, we're going to muck in together and get this done, even though it's tough. And so we felt really blessed by some of the people that agreed to work on the film with us.
So you've got your main character is the one going through this journey. So what was the challenge in terms of casting Mikey? Is the main role? Is that right?
It was. So, no, I would say that they're kind of like, he would be second lead, I guess. So the main character is played by Danny Horn, who's fantastic. And he has been previously in Sunny Afternoon, the Ray Davis musical. So he's playing young Ray Davis. He's also in Doctor Who. And we cast him through our casting agent, Zita, at ET Casting. So Zita Konak is fab. And she also cast several of the other roles for us. But Joe Sims, the lovely and amazing Joe Sims, who played Mikey, was someone that we actually knew through another filmmaker in Bristol. So Paul Holbrook is a guy who's made a number of amazing shorts, and he made a film called Hungry Joe, which starred Joe Sims. And as I was trying to work out who we would want to cast for this, I suddenly thought, hang on a second, and that guy, and Paul was very generous, connected straight away, and luckily Joe liked it. And Joe had, according to our casting director, like something of a name, and obviously, that would be, I think he's great, but I don't know how well he's kind of, or widely he's thought of. And then we realised, of course, he was in Broadchurch, and he was in Doctor Who, and he was in Uncle, and suddenly it all clicked, and we realised, okay, so what Zita said was, we're going to hold back our casting call until Joe comes on, and she was fairly convinced that really helped us in terms of leveraging and elevating the people who responded to our casting call. We were so lucky to find Danny, and he was such an amazing talent. He has this wonderful, wide open, kind of like big eyes, like very kind of adorable, but also he has this kind of like very energetic kind of intensity to him. And we were only able to find people like Danny and Charlotte Pike and Michelle Moran and Hasina Raja through Joe Sims coming on board first. So it kind of felt a little bit like a domino thing of like getting the right person in first. Yeah. Just the last thing
Well,
to say
thank you
about
for sharing
Frightfest
that.
is that
That's a
you know,
great
like
insight into
it's
the
obviously the
movie. I'll
biggest
put
genre
links in the
festival
show
in
notes so people
the
can see
UK. But the thing about Frightfest, which I think is most amazing, is the community that they've built around what they do. And so the thing that I really feel is anomalous to this film is there was a real community kind of effort around what we did with Blockhead. And so being able to show it to that community who are like so passionate and like so informed and like so vocal, we're really excited to get it in front of those audiences because we think it's going to be a real scream. It's going to be really fun. So yeah, we're very grateful to be sharing at Frightfest, and yeah, we're really looking forward to it.
You've reminded me of a question that I've asked in the past when I've spoke to Frightfesters. Is there a particular moment you're looking forward to? You know, if it doesn't spoil things too much, or if you can say it without spoiling, is there a particular moment that you're looking forward to seeing with the Frightfest audience?
Well, there are a couple of big ones, but what I'm most interested in is that what we tried to do is create this kind of hallucinatory sort of journey, this sort of descent into kind of creative jealousy and psychosis, which we took to calling the unraveling, like he unravels, but there is a couple of, I mean, the one I was just describing, like, so the moment that we were talking about, there's a couple of moments where we kind of let rip on some of the good old ultra violence, yeah, really looking forward to seeing that with them. But I guess really what we hope is that you know, we get to communicate what we were trying to go for with this kind of this journey, this sort of descent. So that there are some standout moments, but also there is this kind of like longer kind of like tale where you go from what is definitely reality into what is definitely something other than reality. And that's the kind of the journey that we hope we take them on. And yeah, you know, I've shown before at Frightfest, my film Deep Clean was there in 2018 at Halloween with Paul Kay and Tony Way. And yeah, they're a great audience. We're very excited to show it to them because yeah, they're just so passionate and committed. It's a great bunch.
Thank you for sharing that about Blockhead. And now we move into 3 horror films that have impacted everything in your adult life. You will get 5 minutes per film, and every time we hear this sound, that will signify that the 5 minutes are up and that we move on to the next film. I'm not a tyrant. You will be allowed to finish thoughts if you're in the middle of one. First off, there were 3 different endings for your first choice. I don't know if you knew this. And they ended up using the choice that James Wood made. It was his design. The majority of the trailer was created on a Commodore 64, which was news to me this morning. The director had to double for his star in the scenes where he's wired up to a helmet because they feared he'd be electrocuted. And Brian Oblivion is based on Marshall McLuhan, a Canadian philosopher famed for The Medium is the Message, which makes a lot of sense. I'm talking about David Cronenberg's 1983 film Videodrome. So tell us, Matt, where does this fit in terms of fond memories, impact on your life, or indeed impact on Blockhead?
Well, the film came out in 1983. I wouldn't have seen it in 1983. I probably would have seen it about 4, maybe 5 years later when I was 15 or 16, and it would have been on VHS, which is obviously appropriate for that particular film. I think it was one of those films that I was a bit scared of before I saw it because there was sort of quite lurid kind of like VHS cover art. And I think the thing that really attracted me to it was that I really couldn't tell what was going on. And it took me several, because of this descent, which it feels like the plot, it makes sense in the first half, and in the second half it kind of like goes off into what can only be described as a kind of like an emotional roller coaster rather than a plot driven one. And I was really interested by that because most of the films I'd seen up until that point had been ones that you can understand. Well, you know, the shark comes and then they kill the shark and you understand what's happened. Whereas this, it had this kind of open-ended, slightly more interpretational, I would say emotional kind of descent that the lead character goes on. I didn't know very much about James Woods when I first saw it, but his performance I think is fantastic because he's a pretty unlikable character, and realistically, realistically, you're coasting on the kind of charisma of James Woods, sort of at the height of his powers, and he's kind of rude with people, and he's kind of short, and he's not what I would call a kind of a conventional hero. But what he does have, which I really liked, was that he had a very clear and defined drive and purpose. He wanted to find something tough, and what happens is that he ends up in as a pawn in this game between two factions of essentially a culture war going on in America. And on one side you have Spectacular Optical, and you have Barry Convex, who are essentially creating this thing called Videodrome, which is a signal which is supposed to give the viewer a tumors, cancer. And on the other side, you have Bianca and Brian Oblivion, only ever seen on a TV screen, who essentially are wanting to make TV available to the masses and plug people back into the grid. So they run this thing called it's kind of like a homeless shelter for people who don't have access, the cathode ray mission. Such a great name. In fact, the whole thing's full of great names. But the idea of one side of America saying you can't watch this because it's bad for you and we're going to stop you doing it, and on the other side a bunch of people saying you should be able to watch anything that you like and we're going to facilitate that. And Max Wren becomes the pawn between this battle, and so this was something. I think the reason that it strikes home to me is because this is exactly what David Cronenberg himself was experiencing. So the reason that he made the film was because after his first two movies, Rabid and Shivers, which were funded by the Canadian Film Development Corporation, there was all this outrage because taxpayers' money was being spent on essentially what some people considered to be video nasties. And there was outrage. In fact, he was even thrown out of his apartment building in Toronto because he had apparently crossed some moral abuses clause in his contract, and they threw him out of his flat. And so essentially what he was making a film about was his own situation, which was, well, if you're interested in darker material, if you're interested in the dark side.
I didn't know this.
Yeah. If you're interested in the darker side of humanity and you're interested in exploring that, does that essentially criminalize you? Are you now a criminal, and should you be treated a certain way for liking something like this? Now, in the film, he takes this example far farther than he ever did. Obviously, Max Wren is tuning into what you could call snuff TV. There's very dark, torturous kind of like there's abuse going on, and it's not censored. This is the point. This is why he's drawn to it. Absolutely. So David Cronenberg was really facilitating an argument about his own situation, about am I culpable because I like certain things. So essentially what it did to me was it kind of went, well...
Finish your thought, go on.
I'm going to finish my thought. It basically said, what is it about the darkness that might have merit? And is there any way that you can allow people to kind of make their own choices versus the government essentially deciding what you watch? And the last point I'll make, which is very much not my point, it's a wider point, is that it predicted so many things. It predicted the internet, it predicted interactive television, it predicted virtual reality, it predicted in television names. Brian Oblivion says this is not my real name, it's my television name. It predicted usernames and alter egos, screen addiction, torture porn, the dark web, and hybrid organisms. So many people consider it to be this kind of time capsule, which was about 30 years into the future in terms of what we were going to become. And it's a very prescient, I think, look at not only the addictive nature of what that kind of content can mean to people, but also the moral argument about what we should and not be allowed to watch, and who gets to decide that. But all wrapped up in this like great big like roller coaster fuck you of a movie with like amazing special effects, which are really, really like next level kind of 80s stuff. I love that movie.
I do too. It definitely fucked me up as a kid for the reasons that you described, because you're kind of used to the way things are delivered, and I'd experienced through VHS video nasties before they got banned as a too young a kid. And then this comes along. I didn't see this in 83. I think I probably saw it about the same time as you, like 3 or 4 years after. And for that, seeing that, and you were like, I didn't understand. I wouldn't claim to understand anything, but also not understanding connectivity, which we do understand now a lot more. And that idea you were vulnerable. And that's what left me scared. Was this idea, he obviously, David Cronenberg's idea was, they're telling you that if you watch this, you'll catch some fucking disease, and you're like, no, you won't.
Well, and the other idea, just to finish off, because it connects to the next two choices I've made, but the other idea which I really liked in it was the normalizing of something which you hadn't realized wasn't normal until it was. So basically there's a very throwaway line in the film where Harlan, who's kind of like the pirate, kind of the piracy guy who works in the TV station, James Wood just asked him, have you been hallucinating more than usual recently? And you're like, wow, that's so strange. What does that mean? And basically what it means is that in this world, hallucinations are part of the currency of how they do their business. And my mind was blown by that. I was like, wow, in this world, hallucination is normal. And it was just set up by this one little throwaway line. And suddenly you realize that you're not in normal world. You're in this world, which is a very specific world. And the last thing that any great psychological horror should have is it has one defining image, I think. And the gun coming out of the TV, and then James Woods kind of pushing his head kind of into Nikki Brand's kind of lips. That's such a defining image of like 80s horror, I think. The idea of like you pouring yourself into the television. And so I think that if you're going to have something which sticks up like that culturally, like having that one image which really, really allows you to understand the concept of what's going on, but summed up in one visual, I think is quite a key moment. I've gone way over my 5 minutes. I'm so sorry. I will pay the forfeit.
Well, look, sir, John Cusack got his hands on the script for your second choice after he'd asked his agent to get the craziest, most unproducible script he could find. Impressed with it, he asked his agent to follow its progress. The famous actor whose name is in the title was approached several times and loved the script, but he had recommended Tom Cruise to play it, which was already in the offing apparently during certain phases of the development.
Really?
They said, could you change the title to Being Tom Cruise? I am indeed talking about Spike Jonze's Being John Malkovich from 1999. So tell us, A, how this is a horror film, and I buy it, and what impact and what memories this has for you.
So it came out in 1999. I don't know if you've seen that book, which is like called The Greatest Year of Movies Ever, where a lot of films came out in 1999, like Magnolia and The Matrix, which a lot of people kind of think was this kind of signal year, and Being John Malkovich was one of them. It obviously was the first film from Charlie Kaufman that was made with Spike Jonze. I think he might have had that other one with George Clooney around that time. But the thing that I think most blew me away was the idea is such a strange one, but it makes such complete sense because of the authenticity with which they approach the creation of the world. And so basically they were very big on the idea that we're not going to make it bright. It's not going to be a bright, fun comedy. It's going to be a very dark comedy. And the first week they shot the whole thing in Craig's apartment, Craig and Lottie's apartment, and Sony, the studio, were like frantic going, this is too dark, and then what happened was that luckily after the first week, the film company that they were working for got bought, and the executives left them alone for the rest of the shoot. So one of the reasons why Being John Malkovich is able to be like that is because they weren't being scrutinized. I think the big idea in it is so bonkers, and the other thing that I love about like any film that I'm really drawn to is the making of story is always like really fascinating. So the fact that they would get hold of this script, Charlie Kaufman would go and meet with John Malkovich and his producers, and them saying, right, well, I'm not going to be in it. John Malkovich is saying this, but if you make it about something else, we'll direct it. And Charlie Kaufman just goes, no. And it's like, well, who else are you going to get? I mean, like the person who's in it is saying no, but they held on to their guns. They stuck to their guns. And then you get Spike Jonze. Then Francis Ford Coppola calls Being John Malkovich and says, by the way, Spike Jonze, we're all going to end up working for this guy one day because Spike Jonze just married his daughter, Sofia Coppola. So basically, to a certain extent, Francis Ford Coppola convinced John Malkovich to look at again this project. And he'd always loved the script. But I think that the two things that are amazing. One is that leap that Charlie Kaufman and Spike Jonze made, which is it's going to be about him and we won't make it with anyone else. And then the second leap is Malkovich going, I'm in. I mean, that's such an insane decision on his part, because most other actors, I think, would be concerned about being portrayed negatively, and he is made fun of in the film. And he apparently saw a subsequent draft after he'd come on where they'd taken out the nastiest jokes about him. He said, no, what are you doing? Put all those back in. That's good stuff. So his willingness to be his own kind of like sacred cow being kicked down the street is the reason why it's so good. So the fact that the film exists at all is such an anomalous idea. And then I think the idea that it's a horror movie, I should get onto that. So it's funny if you're a frustrated puppeteer who can't get his puppetry career going. And this is the umbilical connection to Videodrome. In the world of Being John Malkovich, famous puppeteer Derek Mantini gets a TV special because he has a 60-foot puppet of, is it Emily Bronte? I can't remember. He's doing a reading of an Emily Bronte novel. So in this world, puppetry is kind of recognized much more than in our world. And so there's this one twist to the world that makes it its own world, which I'm always fascinated by. But the reason I think it's a horror movie is because if you look at it from the frustrated puppeteer's point of view, it's funny. It's like, oh, I can't be a puppeteer. That's funny. And he's a really good puppeteer as well, being one of the excellent jokes. But if you look at it from John Malkovich's point of view, it's actually about an immortality cult who invade his body in order to have everlasting life and take control of him, essentially submerging his own personality into what's very similar to the sunken place in Get Out.
Finish your thought.
And I will acknowledge that I did not come up with that idea. That was from Travis Mowry at Script Lab. So the idea of there being a really very strong similarity between Being John Malkovich and Get Out, and that they're both about the subsuming of identities and the sunken place in order to have an immortality cult take over the body of the host, which I think is actually quite an interesting idea. But in this particular version, it's comedically treated, I think the other reason that it's a horror movie, just to finish off, is because Craig's pathetic desire to be recognized for puppetry, which obviously some people might consider to be absurd kind of anyway, but in that world, it's not absurd. His pathetic desire to be loved for this thing, which everyone else finds ridiculous, he will go so far as to potentially kill people. And for that, he is marooned at the end in the body of, it's not his daughter, it's actually Malkovich and Catherine Keener's character, Maxine's daughter. But he's marooned in the body of the young girl, powerless to do anything apart from look at the life that he wishes he had had. And I can't think of a better definition of hell. It really is like a hellish ending for someone who, because of John Cusack's innate likability, we do actually care for. But I would say that those two ideas, the idea of the body invasion by the immortality cult and this awful ending, I would say qualify as a horror film.
Oh no, I mean it's interesting because if you go, I went on IMDb after you got your first email, and I was like, actually it says high concept comedy. And it says psychological drama, and obviously psychological drama easily feeds into what we understand horror to be without blinking at all. So no, I buy it. I mean, you and I lived through 1999, and I'm not sure I knew how good it was in terms of films that were going to have longevity. I think it's not about that they were all brilliant and everything was perfect. It was more the fact that we're still talking about many of them today. Obviously Fight Club's the other one, isn't it?
Yes. And the other thing that I've realised, which is that 3 out of the 4 kind of most well-known Charlie Kaufman films, obviously Being John Malkovich adaptation, Eternal Sunshine, and Synecdoche, New York, excluding Synecdoche, New York, those 3 films are all about storytellers. So the other umbilical connection to Blockhead is that I'm also very interested in films about storytellers. And that, I think, probably in part is because of Charlie Kaufman's work, and how amazing he is at essentially saying that the idea of trying to be a storyteller is fraught with danger and creative potholes and despair and possibly triumph and humor and wonder, but quite often despair, and that being validated as a subject by him, I think is something that I've really been drawn to as a storyteller myself.
Why would anybody do it, eh?
It's too bloody hard.
Right then, for your final choice, we've got a 21st century horror double bill and they're both feature film directorial debuts as well. One, due to its graphic nature, has had cinemas handing out vomit bags, and the other, I have argued, because of the Sunno Johan Johansson score and the fact that the weapon forged by the protagonist was inspired by the Celtic Frost logo,
yes,
is in fact the most heavy metal horror film ever made.
Yes,
that's my theory, just mine. I'm talking about 2016's Raw being paired with 2018's Mandy. So tell us about this brilliant double bill you're going to host.
Well, so I think that something was happening with horror in 2016, and I interviewed Steve Oram about this. So in 2016 at the London Film Festival, playing in that festival were Raw, I Am Not a Serial Killer, Prevenge, The Ghoul, A Dark Song, The Autopsy of Jane Doe, and there was also a Ben Wheatley screen talk. And I know that because I've actually got the itinerary of my ticket purchases from London Film Festival 2016 here. I mentioned that, and because it felt like something was happening with horror, and it was something to do. It was something to do with a new way of looking at things, and that it can't be ignored that may have been to do with female voices. So obviously Julia Deconeau came out onto the scene with Raw in 2016, but Coralie Fargiat was not far behind with Revenge. And obviously I would say that there's probably a fairly direct line between Raw coming out and Titan leading to The Substance, which obviously was the big kind of breakout body horror of last year and early this year, in terms of not only awareness, but also Oscars and et cetera, et cetera. So one of the things that I think was happening, that there was a change in the way that the public was prepared to accept slightly more extreme subject matter, including body horror, because Raw, when it came out, it went bigger than the festival circuit. It skipped over into the public consciousness because it had been so widely reviewed. The only reason I got to saw it at Cannes, it was amazing. I was at a press screening and I didn't get in, and basically I was the last one, and they said, no, we haven't got any more room. So I stood there and everyone else had gone in. About 15 minutes later, someone came out looking like they were about to throw up. And they said, we've got one seat. And I was like, brilliant, yes. So I ran in to see it. So I was one of the first people to see it in Cannes. And we all stumbled out about an hour and a half later into sunlight going, what the fuck was that? And it was absolutely a kind of a sea change moment for me in terms of not only how strange something could be, but also that they had used Garance Marillier, the lead actor in that film, actress, who was absolutely stunning. And I found that to be a very interesting moment in terms of what you thought you could get away with. The reason I paired it with Mandy was because I felt that there was something that had happened with horror and the way that it was able to go to extremes, but also keep the audience with you. And I think that applies to Raw, but it also applies to Mandy. And the reason for that is Nicolas Cage's performance. And obviously people talk a lot about, how far he goes and his kind of, his kabuki school of acting, which he talks about, this new shamanism, he calls it. But I think that Mandy would be, the kind of the high point of like late era Cage in terms of how far he was prepared to go, but still to remain within the bounds of the story. And what it does is it allows a story to go to these amazing places where you couldn't imagine these fights with 8-foot-long chainsaws and these amazing leather-clad, spiked kind of like motorbike Hell's Angel acid freaks, and a battle between them, which is really to do with one guy getting back his self-respect. And so I think that the thing that I really responded to with Raw is the same thing that I responded to with Mandy, which is basically how far the filmmakers can go with taking you out to the edge of a subject matter, but not tipping you so far over the edge that you run screaming from the cinema and can't watch it. And there obviously are films that go that far and people kind of pull back from them or can do. So I think that for me, I found Mandy and Raw both very funny. I think they're actually really amusing films, and I like them for that humor that they have as well. But I think the thing that happened for me was that I suddenly got a sense of how far you could go with things if you wanted to, by this very specific creation of a world which allowed you to explore those things. And I think for me, Nicolas Cage and Garance Marillier's performances were the reasons why those filmmakers could go to those places, because you sense the innate humanity in both of those lead characters, and therefore you are with them as opposed to just seeing horrific things on screen. You're actually with the character who is going through this really, really intense emotional journey. And so to me, that was just, those two films stood out recently as being the ones that kind of opened up my brain as to like how far you could go with something if you're willing to create that world around them in an emotionally genuine and honest way. You're not cheating, you're not going for cheap tricks, you're actually taking the audience with that character on that emotional journey. If you do that, you can go quite a long way. I think I had almost finished my thought.
Good man. I was thinking when you were coming to the end there, and I think a link between all of them, all the films you've discussed, is, and it's something that I think is important, because you said, you're right, there is humour. There's humour in Being John Malkovich. There's even humour in Videodrome in the first half for certain. You know, it's the absurdity is amazing, and Raw, and you know the fact that a coming of age story of a cannibal. It's amazing. You know, that's just a ridiculous. To even say it out loud is absurd, but it works because what they all do is they ground themselves in a world where, like, and I didn't even know about the world where hallucinating is just part of the course. Like, oh, have you got wind? Yes, I've got wind, and I'm hallucinating. You know, it's like it's that and what makes them work so well is that they play it so straight and allow you to take it as serious as or not. You know, proper. I mean, I guess like the way that the best sci-fi works is sci-fi and horror work where we're not laughing at anything. You know, you suspend your belief because this is what this world's like in this film, and that's what sustains the story.
And it's a real combination of world building and of the narrative leaps that the script requires you as an audience member to make. Like whether we're going to go like, you know, here's an alien, or here's like a fantastic thing you've never seen. How far you're prepared to do, and if you can do that incrementally, and you have, and I think this is the key to those last two films, but it also applies to Malkovich and to Videodrome as well. It's a really a central committed performance which allows the audience to go on the journey with the protagonist, because if you have someone who's being snarky or like kind of not going with it, then you'll lose people straight away, and that's when you get, you know, bad kind of bad vibes coming off of the film. And I think that those last two films particularly, maybe even more so than the first two, have really committed emotional performances. I mean, that scene where Nicolas Cage is just drinking that vodka in his pants, like, and just like going like I can't think of another actor who could pull that off and it wouldn't be comic. But you're actually with him going, oh no, I can feel his soul disintegrating in pain. I can feel it. And that's because he genuinely has committed to that moment. And so I think those things are really connected with me because they're about emotional journey.
I would say that I had a similar experience at 2011's Frightfest, where both Lucky McKee's The Woman, starring Pollyanna McIntosh, and Ben Wheatley's Kill This played, where seeing both those movies completely and utterly derailed me in terms of what I was trying to write. Like, it made me go, oh, I've got to aim higher than I currently am. You know, and then Raw and Mandy come along and they provide a similar lift. And it's, you know, just thinking about what you're saying about, and I don't mean that I have to be as good as them. It's I have to aspire to the ambition of them in terms of what they're trying to do. Or
you find what the correlative is to like your own kind of filmmaking, like kind of concerns, the things that you're drawn to, like, you know, whatever it is that you're like really interested or into, but you realize, there is a door into a world which isn't our world, if that's the kind of thing you're interested in doing, that world building. And here's one way. And so that's why I think it's really important for filmmakers to you know, to talk about their process with other filmmakers, with other writers. But the point is that like you're trying to bounce the kind of the beta test version of your story around on people and find out, oh, well, would that work? And like if it's a bit like this and a bit like that, like, you know, and what it always tells me is that the central performance, particularly when you're going to go somewhere which is not real, like has to be the thing that emotionally grounds the story, that you feel like you're real and in that world. And I think that's why Ben Wheatley's movies, particularly things like Kill List and Sightseers and Field in England, they all just felt so, and Down Terrace, they all just felt so earthy and real. Like you could definitely feel the commitment to the reality of everyone involved, and you believed in that world really, really strongly. And I think that even when you're going somewhere big and strange, like, you know, with Mandy or Raw, you if you believe in the central character and their journey, then you can buy that world. And I think that's why they were.
Yeah. Right, and let's end on your film then. So before we go, give us a brief synopsis as to what Blockhead is about. We've talked about it in detail, but give us the brief synopsis of it.
A failing novelist whose first novel was a success, but he can't finish his second one. He doesn't know why. He can't write. He's about to lose his girlfriend and his agent and his book deal. He thinks in his delirium that his muse comes to visit him in the form of a drunk, psychotic decorator from Bristol. And obviously, chaos and murder, but also possibly genius ensue.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you for sharing an insight into how you made that film. And thank you for sharing 3 horror films that have impacted everything in your adult life. It just gives me to say thank you very much for giving your time on the Britflix podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure.
Hey there, Hugh from Podderation here. If you like today's show, why not have a listen to Board Gamers Anonymous, one of the longest running board game podcasts out there. Join Anthony and Chris every week as they discuss everything in the board game world, from card games to miniature games and more. They talk about some of their favourites and hopefully help you find your next ones. If you want to check the show out, you can find more information at podderation.com.